Hi, everybody. Welcome to another Facebook Live Mosaic Dog Training. Hi, I'm Kathy. And today's questions are, we're going to talk about space, not just about the stars. That's a little nod to my oldest daughter, who's actually going to be moving to the Space Coast State tomorrow. So it's kind of funny how everything just kind of fits together. So today what I want to do is I want to talk a little bit about space issues when it comes to choosing a dog or a puppy, because this is something that's really important, to have enough space for your dog or puppy and your family to coexist safely and happily. Now, I know we touched a little bit about this on some previous live, but I want to expand on this a little bit more because I think it's important. So let's look at our house first. So what type of house do you have? A big house, a small house? Does it have a lot of little rooms, a lot of long hallways? Is it open concept? When you look at things like that, you want to look in, I always look at management. So if you have an open concept home, for example, and you have a puppy, how are you going to contain that puppy during the process of potty training, during the process of helping them learn some impulse control and a little increase their frustration threshold when they go through their bitey stages and being little sharks? Sometimes puppies need a timeout. They need a place to rest. And I'm not saying timeout in a negative way. A timeout would be just some time every day throughout the day that your puppy should get to rest, because that's very important for puppies and dogs. When they get a little sharky sometimes as puppies, that can a lot of times just be because they've just had too much stimulation and they need a place to rest. So where are we going to let the puppy rest? How, if we have kids, how are we going to manage the children and the dog or the puppy together? There are times when we want to make sure that we have separate nations for our kids and our dogs. So the Family Paws website has a lot of really excellent information on how to manage dogs and children at various stages of each of their lives. And something called Success Stations, which is where the dog is contained in one area and the children are in another area, can really help the safety factor and help the dogs and the children coexist together much happier and make for a more calm family all around. So if you have an open concept home, or would you be looking at possibly getting an X-Pen? Where are your crates going to be located? Is it possible to use a tether system in situations where you are there 100% of the time, so that your dog isn't going to possibly get tied up in it? But it's really important to look at that. It's important to look at getting baby gates for your home. Do you have doorways that you can fit a baby gate in? So again, you can have a little bit of a separate nation situation when you need it. My home has 5 gates in the upstairs part of our home, and we have several gate within a gates, the ones that you can put up more permanent with the gates that hold open. With my 3 Alaskan Malamutes, sometimes there are times where I have to quickly be able to separate everybody in order for the energy level to decrease a bit, or if they're each chewing on a toy or something like that. It's for the safety of my 3 dogs that and the quiet coexistence of my home that I have what I call a gated community. So it's important to look at your home in that respect and see how you're going to set it up. What about if you have an older dog? Say you're adopting an adult dog that might be a little bit older. Do you have a lot of stairs in your home? If you have a lot of stairs in your home, that how is that older dog going to get up and down the stairs when, as they get older and they end up with orthopedic issues? So, you know, that's just another thing to look at, getting into your home, getting around your home. We have a deck in our home with several stairs, so there have been times when we actually have constructed somewhat of a ramp so that they can come up part of the stairs and they don't have to go all the way when they were older. You know, flooring. How is your flooring? Do you have a lot of carpets? Do you have a lot of hardwood? Do you have a lot of linoleum? Even that, when you look at dogs as they get older, those can be actually slip hazards if you have linoleum or hardwood floors. And so as your dogs get older, how are you going to help them stay safe? You know, orthopedically, we actually use yoga mats in our kitchen because that's the one spot where we have linoleum. So we used to have a yoga mat grid in our kitchen when our first Alaskan Malamute was older and starting to have some arthritic issues. Do you have a fence in your backyard? You know, how big is your backyard? But do you have a fence or not? If you don't have a fence, do you have the ability to have a tether or some sort of overhead lunge line system? You want to make sure that you have your house set up in a way that is going to be convenient for you to open the door and put your dog on that tether, so that you're not going to be quite as inclined to just open the door and let your dog out. So you want that to be convenient. When you're looking at the inside or the outside, size-wise, when you have multiple dogs, is really important too. Dogs like to have a certain amount of space. Some dogs are a little bit, they don't need as much. Some dogs need more. Knowing your dog and your resident dog and how your resident dog feels about space issues is going to help you with yours when you bring in the new one. So it's important to kind of look at the space and see, because if the dogs are on top of themselves too much, that again can cause some space resource guarding issues and could cause some fighting. Open concept in this case might be a little bit better because the dogs have more room. Hallways and doorways can sometimes be places where space resources can be considered for dogs and where possible disagreements can break out. So it's important to have that in your mind if you're bringing another dog into a home that already has dogs, is how are they going to see this environment, and how can I manage this environment so that everybody stays safe and everybody feels like they don't have to fight for a particular door, a particular hallway and such. So that's something to think about too. Again, with the yards, best to have a nice solid fence line, but you know, we talked a little bit about a tether or a lunge. Now those two things are, tethers or lunge lines are a good option for some dogs. It can also frustrate other dogs. So, you know, knowing the dog and the breed's tendencies or the dog's tendencies as you bring them into the home, that's going to help you. Sometimes the tether is a little bit too static for a dog that likes to move around. Having a lunge line system where you have an overhead line going from one area to another with the lunge line in the middle can help your dog move around and feel a little bit more free. Either way, if you're going to be tethering or lunge lining your dog outside, you really need to be out there watching them, because you never know who's going to come into the yard, what's going to come into the yard, you know, if your dog is going to get tangled up in the lines or such. So just kind of take a look at your yard and decide, you know, what's going to be the best. Can we put up a fence? If we do put up a fence, what kind? Do we want a heavy wood fence? Do we want a chain link fence? Even situations like that, you know, you want to look at that and go, chain link is more visual, or less visual, I should say. You can see through it. It does not much of a, it doesn't block the view as much. That's a nice thing in some respects because it kind of gives you a little bit more freedom to see everything else. But if you have a dog that might be reactive to things on the other side of that fence, or have a little bit of barrier frustration where they can see something because of that fence and they can't get to it, that might cause the dog to run the fence line, to bark, to react. So, you want to look at that fence and look at the dog that you're bringing into the home and say, well, maybe chain link fences, you can put privacy slats. We have done that on one side of our fence because we do have a chain link. But we've identified that putting privacy slats on one side of the fence line is a good thing to do to block the view of the dogs that are a couple yards down. We also have some tarp on a corner of one of our areas of the fence because we had dogs on the other side of the fence that like to come right up to ours. So that's something to think about. Do we have a lot of kids in the neighborhood? If you have a lot of kids in your neighborhood, you might want to think of getting a more solid fence, or definitely putting in privacy slats if you have a chain link, because if on that outside chance you're not out there and there's little kids poking their fingers through, that can sometimes be a problem as well. So things to think about in your yard, do you have enough room, for the dog or dogs that you have, so that they can move around, they can get some exercise. If you're going to have a tether or lunge line system, are you willing to really keep your eyes open and stay outside to watch what's going on to make sure your dog stays safe? What I do want to talk about a little bit is electric fence containment systems. Now, before I start, I understand that there might be some communities where you can't have fences. I realize that there's those rules. So if the last resort is an electric fencing system, then it is imperative that the dog is trained on it properly and the dog is never out there alone with that type of system. So with that being said, and I'll talk about that in a minute, a lunge line or a tether system might be a better option. So when we look at electric fencing, it works by having an underground perimeter and a collar, a shock collar that's on the dog, and when the dog gets close to the fencing system, depending on how it's set up, it may beep first to give the dog a warning, and if the dog keeps on going, it may give the dog some sort of a shock. Now, again, let's be honest and let's be real. The reason why these things work is because they cause dogs pain or discomfort of some sort. So because of that, and because of the scientific knowledge that dogs are very associative to what's in their environment, that can cause negative associations. For example, if the dog sees a child going by the street on a bicycle and they start running towards that child, and they get the electrical fence causes their collar to go off and they receive a jolt and they're in pain, they very well can associate that pain with the child on the bike. They don't understand it's coming from a collar. So single event learning is very sentient for a dog. Dogs will learn very quickly just by one event, and sometimes it can take a long time for that one event to be reversed. So from this point forward, possibly the dog could have a negative association to a child or a bike or a child on a bike. So then every time they see that child on a bike or a bicycle go by, or even a child walk by, they may react, and they may be because they're fearing for that pain, and so they're going to try and bark and lunge and look big and mean to make that scary thing go away, so it doesn't hurt them. They're just trying to survive in this particular situation. So that's one reason, and a big reason, why I feel that electrical fences are not a good option. Most dogs, and again, let's look at dogs as they are, and let's not fool ourselves. If a dog wants to cross that line, it will. If it wants to get to whatever's on the other side, that momentary shock is not going to stop the dog from reaching the fence line. Now, the problem with that is, if they get whatever's on the other side, that's been reinforced now. So that behavior may get stronger. The other thing is, if they decide, oh gee, time to come back, and they start wandering back, and the fence line is still on, they're going to be shocked trying to cross the fence line to get back into the property. And if they do that, that's a negative association to their home and to their front yard. So that's something that can happen. They can malfunction. They can fire for no reason at all. They can stop working, and the dog will find that out and cross over. If we leave them on too long, sometimes they can cause abrasions on the neck just because of the two sharp prongs that are on the collar, on the activation device. And so some dogs, you know, they all have very sensitive skin issues, and depending on how long it's on and what they're doing when it is on, it can cause abrasions and cause skin irritation. Some owners may forget they have it on, put the dog in the car and drive away, and next thing you know, the dog is being shocked as you're driving away or walking, taking them for a walk, just because maybe for some reason we forgot to take it off. So there are a lot of reasons why we don't want to use the electrical fencing system, and if that is the absolute last resort, that we are very knowledgeable about the whole environment that the dog is in at that time, and be sure to do the best we can to avoid any negative fallout that could happen from using this kind of device. So I would, you know, if you're ever wondering what to do, how to set this up, before you get an electrical fence, I would love for you to give me a call, and we can talk about all of the options that we have before you would use this particular type of containment. So that was just a little bit about what I wanted to talk about today, is just looking at space. You know, we've talked a lot about how to choose the actual dog. So now we've got kind of some of that in process. Now what we want to do is, you know, we're looking at our home, we're looking at our space, and do those two things correlate with the type of dog that we want? So if you have any questions, you know, feel free to send me an email. Feel free to answer in the comments. I'd be glad to talk further about any of these things if you'd like. And thank you very much for joining me on a Sunday. I really appreciate everybody tuning in, and I hope you have a great rest of the weekend. Feels like fall is here, and for my Alaska Malamutes and I, we're starting to celebrate because snow is around the corner. Sorry, I know not a popular thing, but take care, be well, and I will see everybody next Sunday. Bye.